Hello, and welcome to the Mr. 50mm YouTube channel. Today, we are having a look at the Neewer Z2PRO. Why is there not a space in this name? I feel like it should be Z2 space Pro. Anyways, I'm gonna just call it the Z2, just to keep things simple. Anyway, why is the power rating this watt seconds? It's apparently 76 watt seconds of flash power with this flash. Cool. Why is it in this unit? Where are my guide numbers? Come on! Anyways, let's pack that away for now. We'll get to that later. Moving on, disclosure time. Neewer reached out and asked if I wanted to have a look at some stuff. We ended up at the Z2 Pro and they sent it to me. I get to keep it, they get some content, everyone happy. So we'll start by thanking Neewer for letting me have a look at a big old flash. Honestly, the trend of these tiny little fixed flashes has me a bit tired. You can see this is not a tiny flash. This is not one of those little trendy ones. It's a flashy flash, a big flash, one with a zoom head that tilts, swivels. It's all the things I actually want in a flash. So with that, let's do the thing and yeah, pop some flashes. So what is the Z2 Pro, or Z2? It is a full-sized automatic TTL-enabled flash made by Neewer. Neewer makes this for Canon, Nikon, Sony, and Fujifilm, with mine being the Fujifilm variant. Its full power flashes output at 76 watt seconds of light power. We'll measure the GN values later. The flash has an automatic zoom head and its coverage is from 28mm to 105mm. It can do the rotations from 0 to 330 degrees, and it does a tilt from -7 to 120 degrees. The flash duration for this flash is 1/180th to 1/20,000th of a second, although what specific measurement they're using for the flash duration, whether it's T.5 or T.1, is not specified. At any rate, it can support high-speed sync up to 1/8000th of a second, as well as obviously front and rear curtain sync. Standard flashy flash bits. The Z2 also has an integrated wireless control, and it can be set up to act as either a master or slave in a wireless setup, which is pretty neat. If you have looked at this flash on their webpage, you may have noticed that in the product photos, it has a big old LCD in the back. Not a touchscreen, but a big nice color panel, considering it's a flash. And it's not bad in daylight, which is pretty cool. Now, this flash is equipped with a lithium-ion battery pack, as is cool with flashes nowadays. This one is removable, and it is a 7.2 volt jobby at 3000 milliamp hours. Apparently meaning that it's good for around 600 full power pops, and it has a recycle time of 1.5 seconds. Importantly, this flash claims to be able to do 100 consecutive pops before needing to pause due to heat buildup. It also has 2 modeling lights. One there, and one there. Additionally, it has USB-C charging on the flash, which is done either through the port that is here on the side of the flash, or on the other side, there's a port directly on the battery. Pretty cool. All of this in a package that is 580 grams for around $249.99 USD. But they do seem to have sales a lot, and it does seem to go on sale for quite a bit less. Anyways, there are plenty of specs to look at on this thing, so if you want, I'll drop a link in the description down below. It's just a link to the Neewer product page. What's in the box? Well, in the box you get a flash pouch, a flash stand, a USB-C charging cable, but no brick, and of course, the flash and a battery. It's honestly pretty nice. The pouch and the flash stand kind of remind me of flashes of old. This is a very similar pouch to the one you get on like a Canon 580 or 430. Additionally, the tripod stand, which I just dropped, has a metal tripod, or the flash stand has a tripod socket, and it has a metal tripod mount, which is pretty nice. The pouch itself is kind of okay. It does feel a bit awkward to put in with the round flash head. This is clearly a bit of a squarey kind of case, but it's not bad. Although it's like the one I have for my Canon flashes, it is a little less nice, but still, it's nice that it's included. Operation and feel. Let's start with the feeling of this flash. It is quite a beefy flash, and it feels quite nice, even compared to things like my 580. The 580EX here with batteries comes in at around 480 grams. So this, the Neewer Z2, is around 100 grams more. But if you compare it to something like the new flagship Canon EL1, that is actually 680 grams, so 100 grams more than the Neewer. And so it seems like, at least for this flash, it is about right, in the ballpark for what you'd expect for a flash of the size and the power rating generally. The build of the flash is also very nice. It is overall pretty good, hard, solid feeling plastics, and the tilt and swivel actions are well indexed, so you can feel the little stops where they are. And overall, when you twist and turn, the movement itself is kind of dampened, so it feels generally just solid. It's nice. Additionally, the tripod foot here has a little gasket, but the flash technical data doesn't actually mention any specific weather rating for this, which is fair because you can see on the side, the USB-C port is just kind of there. Now, let's have a look beside my 580EX. This is what I actually normally use when I need to shoot flashy bits. Irrespective of the system, if I can mount the 580EX, I can use the flash. I usually just set it to manual anyways, and then just figure out what kind of settings I need for what kind of lighting I plan to do. It's been my default go-to for around 16 years now, and so this is a little bit of an older flash. If you weren't aware, the 580EX1, the one that I have, was released in around 2004. This was Canon's flagship flash, and it sold for 480 USD. That's quite a bit more than this is, not even counting for inflation. And the 580EX feels quite a bit less good. It has a plastic mount, unlike the metal one on the Neewer. The UI and operation of the 580EX, although it looks kind of similar, is quite a bit slower. Just going through some of the stuff takes longer than doing it with this. And I do gotta mention, from a UI standpoint, the Neewer has these soft buttons here, and you can see what each one will do based on what screen you're on. It's very self-explanatory, and you can just hop in. Additionally, the Neewer is quite quiet. When the 580EX is on, there's quite a lot of buzz from charging up stuff, although this might be due to age. Lastly, the Neewer does use a lithium-ion battery pack, and it employs a slot for it. So there's no doorsies. It's also very nicely done, and things tend to fit pretty well. Although I don't particularly 100% agree that lithium-ion is the way to go for flashes. But whatever, we'll get into that a little bit later. For comparison, the 580EX uses a AA battery door, and it feels awful. This thing feels like I'm going to break it every time I open it. I will say, I typically use this Z2 now on my GFX 50S, not so much on my X-T3, but on the GFX 50S, this flash feels all right. Partly because the GFX 50S is already a bit heavy, so having a high and tall flash that is a bit dense like the Z2 feels not bad. When I do use it on my X-T3, this Z2 is 40 grams heavier than the X-T3 body without a lens on it, so it does feel a bit unbalanced. But it gets better when you do plop on a heavy lens on the X-T3 body. Just wanted to point that out. The Z2 feels like it'd be really at home on a DSLR or a bigger mirrorless camera. But it's not hefty for no reason. It's packed with flashy flash features. And again, the controls are pretty nice. They do a little bit remind me of the Canon style command dial in the back that you can see right here. And you do have 4 dedicated buttons flanking the dial. And you got, again, these 4 soft buttons just below the display, as I mentioned already. Quite a nice layout. Again, reminiscent of older Canon ones, or even modern Canon ones. They kind of do the same thing. The only thing that's kind of odd is this thing, the manual and TTL toggle switch on the side of the flash. It honestly just feels a bit redundant. I mean, there is already a mode button right here, and I find I'd rather use that instead. If you decide that you want to jump into another setting anyways, and you toggle this up, it will hop into the mode, but if you're already in manual mode, then it doesn't do anything. So it really just feels like a weird switch, and I tend to ignore it anyways, since when you do press the mode button, it'll override whatever this is until the next action or next toggle down. So yeah, a weird control, and I don't really like it. So this round head thingy is apparently supposed to affect the light distribution a bit, which is fine and dandy. But in the end, it does mean that we don't really have the integrated wide angle lens bits that you get on older flashes, like the 580EX right here. That's the wide angle bit. Or the bounce card right here, which again, you also get on the 580EX. And that kind of sucks. You don't get that with this. But at least the ring, or this thing, does appear to be made out of I get some ferrous metal. So you could, in theory, maybe make magnetic modifiers to slap on top. Still, I miss the built-in modifiers. I like the ones on the 580 and I think the 430 series flashes. Additionally, since it does lack that built-in modifier, the zoom head goes to 28, where the Canon goes to 24 on the head, and then when you do this, that's 14. So it's kind of nice. And it's nice of these rectangular traditional flashes to do that. You get that extra wideliness. Anyways, quickly let us have a look at these modeling lights. As I mentioned, there are 2. One there, and one integrated into the head. I really, really like these, more than I thought I would. You see, I like macro, but I also like autofocus. And I like my GFX 50S, but its focus system is contrast only. And I do use it with not native Canon glass. Combine all that together, and a lot of the times the AF is a bit unhappy, shall we say. Now, with the modeling light, this thing actually does its thing. The AF shines, if you will. It does, and this thing actually shines. It is quite a useful light for the modeling bits. I found that with the 2-watt modeling lamp, it was able to light up subjects at my 100mm or 50mm macro working distance pretty effectively, and the GFX system would reliably be able to autofocus on my subject much more effectively than if I use the AF assist beam that's also built into this flash, which I found this little assist beam actually doesn't work that well in macro ranges, which is fair. It actually states that the beam is for 0.6 meters and farther, which is kind of far for my macro work. So yeah, modeling lamp, good stuff. I like this. Flash performance. In this segment, we're going to be looking at specs and testing out the claims. Also, we'll be filling out a basic GN table because apparently it's hard to get those nowadays for some reason. Breathe. Right. We'll start with the easy stuff. Battery life. It's stated that the flash should get around 600 poppity pops on a single charge. I found that on my endurance test, I was able to get 552 pops before this thing stopped letting me do any flashes at all. The display would come on, it would just blink with the battery warning being like, you're out. And I will admit though, this is a bit of an unusual situation for the flash. It was me basically trying to pop off as many consecutive flashes as I could before the flash's overtemp kicked in and I let it cool down. So overall, this flash test took me around an hour and 30 minutes to complete, with me doing the pops, letting it rest, and doing more pops until it prompted the error again, or prompted the overheat warning. So I do think that 552 pops is pretty close to the 600 target. It's around 92% of the target. In a less ridiculous situation, I do think 600 is probably more doable. It's probably not hugely normal that someone just going popping every 1.5 seconds for 600 flashes ish, or 100 in a row, taking a break and then doing. This is not an ideal scenario for the flash. Anyways, next we have the claim that the flash can sustain 100 full power pops. This is true. I did this in a room at around 20 degrees Celsius, the battery was topped off, and I hadn't built up any heat from using the flash at all at this point. And so I just sat there, counted the flashes, and just pop, 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 pop. And on the 100th flash, I got a temperature warning. At this point, it would still let me use the flash, but recycle times would increase to around 4 to 5 seconds. And even when I waited the suggested 10 minutes, it didn't completely cool down. It does say to wait 10 minutes, not that it'll completely reset and become perfectly cool in 10 minutes. So fair enough. And so the next set of shots, the overtemp warning triggered at 65 shots. So then I waited for this time 15 minutes to see how many shots that would get me. And that brought me back up to around 80 shots. I admit, I don't see myself doing this kind of shooting consecutively, or this kind of shooting a lot. That is many, many consecutive full power pops all the time for like a couple minutes. I don't see myself doing that. But it is nice to see that the flash can rapidly pop a lot of flashes, and that the the over temperature protection is actually monitoring temps, and it isn't just a timer that resets. So that's pretty neat. Next, let's go at the recycle time. 1.5 seconds is the claim for full power pops. I found this to be generally true when the flash isn't in any sort of over temperature situation. I did a run where I timed how long it took me to fire 10 pops, and it was around 16 seconds. If I had faster reflexes, I probably would have been closer to the 1.5 seconds. So I'd call 1.6 close enough. The next thing I wanted to test was flash duration. It struck me a bit odd for this flash because the duration is stated to be 1/180th at the longest duration for this flash. That's a bit long. For a frame of reference, the Canon EL1 promises at a 1:1 power, the flash duration is 1/960th of a second. That's around 5.5 times shorter than the flash duration of this. Now, I think the 1/960th is pretty excessive since the fastest syncing Canon DSLR or mirrorless cameras sync at around 1/500th. And that's the original Canon 5D, or sorry, the original Canon 1D, which has the CCD sensor in it, the one and only. The next fastest syncing Canon camera is the R1, able to flash sync at 1/400th of a second. So the 1/960th is very short and means that any Canon camera should be able to get the full power shot from the EL1. However, with the newer Z2, the Z2 Pro, the 1/80th, it's kind of long. Most cameras nowadays seem to have a flash sync between 1/200th and 1/250th of a second, meaning that if you blindly just set your flash sync to that number of 1/200th or 1/250th on this flash, you technically lose a bit of light because the pulse duration is longer than the shutter duration. Just an FYI, you can mitigate it by bringing your sync speed down to 1/20th or 1/50th, whatever. Lower than the lower than the 1/180th. So I did actually test this, and not in a massively sciencey way, but I took an older phone, my Galaxy S20, which has a super slow-mo mode, which can fire or record at 960 frames per second. No interpolation, this is the true 960 frames for around 1 second. I then slowed the footage down about 10x from the already slowed footage so I can spot exactly when the flash pulse starts, and that generally got me down to around milliseconds of accuracy. And then I counted how long generally those pulses last until the light is about gone. I ended up mathing across 2 different tests where I was able to successfully capture the newer pulse, and it is indeed around 1/180th of a second. I measured around 1/175th, which is pretty close, and probably there's some rounding error there. And just an FYI, I am using T.1 for the measurement here, meaning that I'm measuring from around start of flash to what I think is around 10% of the flash duration, like the end of the flash duration curve. Sorry, T0.1, which measures from the start of the flash to when it's about 10% intensity. Now, I'm just eyeballing, so this is obviously not a perfect measurement, but using that, I'm getting, again, very close to the stated 1/180th of a second. Now, I will say I measured the 580EX as well using the same T0.1 measurement, and that ended up actually being a fairly long pulse, around 1/90th of a second. However, in Canon's stated flash duration, it says it's supposed to be 1.2 milliseconds, or around 1/800th-ish. However, I will state, I'm not sure whether or not Canon is using the T0.1 or T0.5. They don't say. And so I just measured using around T0.1, or really 0, because I was kind of just trying to eyeball when it looked like the flash was about done. But it would make sense that they're probably using the T0.5, and this may also be the case with the EL1, because that makes the figures look better. Either way, I think in a normal situation, the 1/80th probably isn't a problem. At any rate, let's get back to other bits. Let's again talk about the ability to cycle. With this flash and its ability to take a large amount of consecutive shots, I do think it is very convenient that with the lithium-ion power, you get pretty consistent recycle times. It's quite nice, especially when you compare it to these older AA-powered flashes where the cycle times basically start creeping up as the AA battery packs start draining. Now, let's go to my favorite thing, GN. For this, I set the flash up at 1 meter from my Minolta Autometer 4F, the best staying meter that I own. And At 1 meter distance, I set up the flash at the desired field of view, did a full power hit, and I read the meter. Additionally, I also set the meter ISO to 100, so this basically gets me the GN value at 100 at that field of view, and the formula for GN is aperture times distance, which would be at this case 1. And then that would therefore mean the aperture and GN value are about the same for 1 meter. So as is the custom, usually in marketing terms, they like to advertise GN number on the long end. So the first test I did obviously was at 105 millimeters at full power. And with that, I blasted this flash at 1 meter and it read 29. And I thought that sounded a little bit low. For comparison, I then decided to test my 580EX at full power, and at 105 millimeters as well, its stated value is 58, hence 580EX. You get it? That's the model number. However, when I tested my 580, it clocked in at around GN 40. So it's also it's understated from this value. This doesn't state one, so it's not understating anything. But if you look at an aperture scale, it turns out GN 29 and GN 40 are about 1 stop of light apart. And from 40 to 58 is about another stop. So the 580EX is about 1 stop overstated in its name. Luckily, not a problem with the newer. GN29 is the number I got, and I don't have a thing to compare it with because they only gave me the value of the light output in watt seconds. A super useful measurement. All right, back to the newer. So I ran the test again, and I this time did it at the widest, 28 millimeters. For this, I found that the newer and the 580EX clocked in GN21, which for the 580 is 1 stop away from the stated power, and again for the newer, doesn't matter because they don't provide a table. At this point, I began to understand why I think manufacturers started kind of emphasizing watt seconds. It's harder to measure and therefore harder to directly comment on. I don't know, maybe not. Newer, let me know why you decided watt seconds. I'm just guessing here. At any rate, I'm going to post the GN values that I measured in a table for this flash in a description below and in a link to a Google Sheets for people to look at if you are curious about GN numbers, because apparently I love them. And I assume you may also like them for some reason. I don't know, it's nice. I find it useful and it does legitimately help me at times figure out how to set up a flash. Right, so all of this actually got me thinking, the circular head thingy, does it actually make a difference? Does it distribute light in a circular way? I don't know. So I photographed a wall, and I did so also with the 580, and let's have a compare. Okay, so the circular head does make a difference. I'm not gonna lie, based on what I saw between these two flashes, I did like the way the light distributed on the newer a little more than on the 580EX. You can see on the 580, especially when you get into the more telephoto-y 100 millimeter area, there's a bit of a weird pattern that gets projected, where on this, the distribution is legitimately a round, kind of nicely gradiated thing. It's nice. Next, let's quickly talk about stroboscopic flashes. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail about this because I don't do it that often, but this does have a full range of frequencies and amount of flash pulses in a table. It's quite neat, and generally it seems that there's a lot of reasonably good documentation in the Neewer manual about this. I'll probably do a different video on this because usually when I use that, I'm doing something very specific, and I don't feel that generally it's a hugely useful thing that I see used a lot. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a lot of people like this multi-flash thingamajigger, and I'm just not looking at the pictures that are a result of this because I'm an uncultured person, maybe. I don't know. But in general, know that this flash can do it. I didn't really test it because it's not really my jam, but I may do it if someone asks. Lastly, let's talk about USB-C charging. It is quite convenient. I did notice that they, however, don't really specify the charging speed of this flash, but I was able to plug in my little USB monitor thingy, and I was able to see that when it was charging, I could see that it was doing 5 volts, 3 amps, just about. So that equates to around 15 watt charging speed, which is not bad. And it does mean that from empty, a full charge should be had in around an hour and 20 minutes or so with the 21 watt hour pack. Now, as I said, I'm a bit torn on the whole flashes using these lithium-ion battery packs thingies. For small pocket flashes, it makes sense to help keep the size down, but for these things, I'm not super sure. I get it. Lithium-ion offers a lot of juice for not a lot of space, and that's probably part of the way that they achieve these really low cycle times, nearly consistently through the entire battery drain cycle. However, time is the enemy of these things. My 580EX is, at this point, very old. But I know that in forever from now, I'll be able to pick up AA batteries. And this will work. And this will not have that luxury. It's using a little proprietary Neewer pack, and who knows how long support for these will last. Maybe it will be supported for a really long time, I don't know, but these are a proprietary pack one way or another, and this is a pack made for a product line from one brand. So at some point, the support will die. Now, I get it. They're probably not intending this to be a flash that lasts a human lifetime. But it's kind of weird because I know flashes do seem to survive a long time. I expect that my 580EX will be around after I die. It's been around already quite long. Plus, I have Vivitar 285s from the 70s that I have kicking around that still work and are perfectly fine. They don't have all the super duper fancy thingies, but as a basic flash, that thing is now around 50 something years old, and since it's powered by AA batteries, I can run out anywhere, get a set, drop it into the 285s, drop it into my 580s, and it'll go. Modifiers. Remember how I said I missed having a bounce card? Like on this flashy flash here? Well, I just 3D modeled one and used magnets to attach it to the Z2. Boop. I admit my magnets aren't the best, but they work relatively well enough. Now, this print is pretty small. It took me about 2 hours to make. It did take me a little longer to fit and glue in all the magnets, but if you want to give it a shot and you have a Z2, feel free to take my file. Now, I like this. I like the bounce cards in general because they allow you to, one, bounce the flash and redirect some of that flash towards your subject. This is kind of the nice thing about bounce cards. But I discovered with this 3D print and with the fact that this has a round flash head, you get a little bit of an extra bonus. Because the bounce card isn't fixed to one position, you can reorient your bounce this way and also reattach your 3D printed bounce card to still direct some light that way while bouncing this way. So That's pretty cool. And let's have a look at some samples with and without the printed bounty card. Right, now for a regular sample gallery. Let's have a look. These are just photos that I took with this flash in any manner of configurations, but all of them did use this to help light the photos, or were the primary light source for photos. Recommendation and conclusion. All right, I'll say it. I like this a lot. You may have noticed that I review quite a few pocket flashes. These are fun, and I enjoyed playing with them, but they are clearly trying to capitalize on the whole direct flash look. A look that I do not aspire to. So while they are fun and useful in some certain instances, given how small they are, again, that's kind of their main thing, you can pack them wherever. When otherwise given the opportunity, I'd rather pick the full-size flash like this one. I'm gonna say it right now. This Z2PRO is very likely going to become my new mainstay flash. Until the battery kicks the bucket, then this will be back. But I do really like this. The power output I think is quite good. It has a fairly nice flash pattern that we saw. The flash itself feels nicely built. Range of motion is very good. And it has a very nice, pretty easy to use UI. Overall, it's just a good flash. Additionally, since I can actually toss it on auto TTL on my Fuji cameras, I can just put it on, bounce it wherever, and just have it do all the metering work for me. But since this is also just a regular hot shoe, I can chunk it on anything that has a regular hot shoe, just use it in the manual mode, and it'll work just fine. And as I mentioned, the modeling light really is awesome for macro work. I don't normally have one of those little ring light LED thingies, so this is a fairly good alternative. I really like it. And it's not nearly as cumbersome to set up as those little ring light jobbies. So thanks again to Neewer for reaching out and giving me the opportunity to review this banger of a flash. Let me remind everyone that the flash is generally around $250 USD when it's not on sale. But again, I did not pay for mine. But at this price point, I personally think it's a fairly solid value, especially when you look at other flashes with a similar capability from first-party makers. They get quite a bit spendy for some fairly small or pretty niche differences. I am noticing that a lot of first-party flashes have some very interesting, very weird stroboscopic modes, and there are probably some people that really like that. And I noticed that some of the more expensive flashes have fans nowadays to help with cooling, but they all have very, very big price tags. So given that, I was never really going to be looking at any of those to replace my 580EX. However, at the price point that this is going for, I would have given it a thought. with that, let's end this extremely long video about a flash. But let me know, what flashes are you using? Do you currently use a Neewer flash? Or does anyone watching actually have one of those Canon EL1s? They're really, really expensive. Let me know in the comments below. And with that, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Maybe a super thanks. Till next time, bye.